everybody. Welcome to the Fire It Up with CJ show. Today we have Leslie Lewis here, who's the founder of Culture 3 Council, and we're going to be talking about how do you work with a cross-cultural group. And one of the key issues is communication, so we're going to focus on that today. So welcome, Leslie.
Hi, CJ. Thank you for having me on your show.
It's great to have you here. So I want to find out how long have you been working with teams and how have things shifted over time? Because this cross-cultural thing was kind of a thing a while ago when we started trading in global markets and going to the Far East and such. But it seems like it's really important right now. How have you seen it shifted over the course of your consulting work?
Well, I started in this work 3 decades ago, about 35 years ago. So that sounds like a
Wow.
long time, but it has been a long time.
Yeah.
And I've always been interested in cross-cultural. I grew up in a very bicultural family and was just brought into different cultures. And then my first graduate degree was in cross-cultural and then started working in that field. And I've seen it start off, I'd say from the 80s, late 70s, early 80s. There was really very little interest in the sense of cross-cultural training, cross-cultural leadership, in looking at all these areas. And in the last 15 years, it has just boomed into, it's global. I mean, and of course, it needs to be global because globalization has become such an important factor, whether that be with corporations, education, governments, and so forth. Everything has started to expand. And so learning about the different cultures and who you're working with and living with have become more paramount on a
Hmm.
daily basis.
Yeah, and have you found that the types of like what are the ways that people used to work and even in the early 80s then, and what are the kind of problems that they have now? What's the difference that you've noticed?
Well, I think that when in the 80s, um, people didn't have an awareness. It was more about if we were conducting business, people would go in and depending upon their culture and their style of work and work ethics and so forth, it would be more we do it my way or just a lack of understanding. We'd go in to try to present a contract or make
Mm,
a deal and assume that everything was okay and that the dotted line would be signed and off we'd go.
right.
And that is not the case. And then, therefore, and henceforth, many companies ran into difficulties with that in
Mm,
the cultural aspect
hmm.
in global settings. So now, what corporations, companies, governments, and so forth have pulled back and started to really re-examine
Hmm.
what is important here in addressing cultures and how do we work in teams, how do we work together and have an understanding. And when I say understanding of culture and understanding of one's own culture, because what I've seen over the years, it's really incredible how many people have an understanding, somewhat of an understanding of their own culture, but when they really delve into, well, why are my mannerisms like this? Why do my hands shake? Because I was born in New York. Or why does someone just sit there and have no movement in a meeting?
Hmm.
Or there's silence and so forth and so on. And so I think that there's just a much more of an awareness and people wanting to know how to work in cross-cultural and diversity and inclusion and so forth, the different areas.
Yeah, so I have a friend of mine who was telling me that at Microsoft now there's a manager of a development team that actually may manage people who are in a different country, like literally outsourcing a body of work. And then within the same office, and in the Redmond office, they have someone who is from a group of people who are from China, a group of people who are from India, and a group of people that are Russian. And who else who knows
Right.
who else is
Who
there.
else is there?
And he said that really interesting thing was that like the Russian managers would prefer Russian folks would prefer going to the Russian manager, which of course makes sense, but that there would be little cliques of people that and trust built on ethnicity And it was actually a challenging scenario to manage a group of cross-cultural developers because each of them had, the manager who actually was not any of these ethnicities had a hard time managing. What would you what would you say to that person who is in that kind of scenario? What are they usually, as a manager, what are the key insights that they're usually missing?
Okay, well, first of all, what this manager was experiencing is very normal
Mm-hmm.
because we all tend to gravitate towards our own culture and our language, our first language.
Mm-hmm.
And because we feel more comfortable with it, we know how to operate. We know the cultural lenses.
Mm-hmm.
And then when we start to embrace other cultures, as this manager, was, seeing and working with, it's
Frankly, I don't know if he was embracing. He was just like, I don't know what. It was kind of like, I don't know what to
what's
do.
going on
Yeah,
here.
I don't know what to do.
Yeah, I've got a Russian and I've got Indian, and I've got a Chinese person.
Yeah,
I'm assuming he was American. I don't
yeah,
know.
he was.
But so all of a sudden, when you start to work in these cross-cultural teams, it's like, how do we come together? What is the major theme?
Mm-hmm.
And as I have said to many people, senior managers and so forth in training and whomever, that you have not been hired. This is double negative because you do a terrible job. You've been hired usually because you do and you have the experience and the knowledge of whatever the job description is about.
Right.
What people have not been often taught and experienced is the cross cultural. How do we come together with a person, perhaps from Asia, having had lived in Asia for 32 years
Mm-hmm.
and worked there for many, many years, obviously, is that how an Asian person will approach it and be in a meeting
Mm-hmm.
is very different.
Mm.
And they may, depending upon how verbal, how quickly we want to get the meeting over with. Some cultures want to get, okay, here we are, let's go in, get the meeting over with. Other cultures will be then, let's take our time, let's look at this. They discuss many
Mm.
different options. Let's take a break. We'll come back tomorrow. There is what they call high context and low context communication.
Mm-hmm.
And a high context cultures like the Japanese, the Russians, the Chinese, many of the Asian cultures, India, are very high context.
Mm-hmm.
And what that means is that they bring in many different um, areas to discuss
Mm.
in their strategy meetings, in their business meetings, and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas an American or more European, not all Europeans, but we would be called more low context. We
Mm-hmm.
come in, let's lay out what we want to say, let's discuss it. Okay, we've said it, we're finished, done.
Right. Like we've made a decision in
And
the
we've
meeting.
made a decision in
Right.
the meeting, and okay, let's move on.
Right.
And high context cultures would go, whoa, 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 wait a minute. Or you may not hear any comment
Mm-hmm.
because you may be met with silence. Because in communication skills, silence it's a wonderful tool. It can be a great negotiating tool.
Mm-hmm.
Silence and people just sitting there and just going,
Mm-hmm.
and then other cultures like, oh, we don't feel comfortable with silence.
Right. Yeah.
I
So
mean,
you'd be like, what's going on? Why aren't you talking? Are you in agreement or not in agreement? Are you mad? I'm not sure what to imagine what's happening.
that's right. And so we start to, fill in the gaps like, well,
Right.
come on, let's say something, or let's move the deal along,
Right.
or whatever we're discussing, or what would this team like for the next 6 months when you're,
Right.
So silence is met, or silence may be also, and and going back to your Microsoft team here, maybe no one's speaking up because they didn't quite understand, perhaps, what this person was talking about, this particular manager was saying.
And they're too embarrassed to say anything.
And that would be a loss of face, or they would not be embarrassed and they would not say anything because they are supposed to understand.
Mm.
And you would never ask a question to someone who has a more senior title. So,
Oh, so that would be rude, considered rude, disrespectful.
yeah, or you don't want the person the senior to think that you don't know.
Okay.
Again, that could be an embarrassment, it could be a loss of face, and so forth. And so, it's learning how each culture is going to operate, have an understanding of the different cultures that you're working with, and how do we create this team so everyone has an understanding.
Mm, mm-hmm.
How what does it mean to negotiate in Russia?
Right.
How do people negotiate versus an American versus a Chinese versus an Indian?
I don't know. How do they negotiate? So if you have, so let's go through each of those. If you have a Chinese person, and let's say we're talking about, flex hours, which is all about a negotiation about, how would a Chinese person negotiate that?
Well, depending on flex time. First of all, does the person understand, and how long have they been in the United States?
Okay, right. So let's
Because
say that they're brand new. They're brand new, and they don't really understand even the concept of flex time. So you have to explain that.
right. So it's really saying, okay, wait a minute. We're starting with an issue about flex time. Do these cultures understand what flex time means? And what does flex time mean in the United States? And what does flex time then mean culturally for Seattle? If we're looking
Mm,
at a Seattle based company
right,
or Washington State.
right.
So we have to look at, is this going to be corporate culture policies regulation that will be mandated globally?
Mm-hmm.
And does everybody understand that? Because in many countries you wouldn't have flex time. You don't
Right.
have the option.
Ah, okay, got it. So you have to first explain the idea of flex time, and then how does an Asian person negotiate that? So let's say there's a team meeting and it's just for the Seattle office, so it's not necessarily a global thing. So everyone gets to say if they want to work flex time, do they not want to work flex time? If not that none of those things, and what do they want to work? Let's say
Right.
it's one of those scenarios, and how would an Asian person navigate that? How would a Indian person navigate that? How would a Russian person navigate that? How would they be different?
Well, I think they would have to consider, under, like we said, the definition of what flex time means.
Right.
Two, how would we incorporate that? How do we incorporate that into the work day or into the work week, monthly? How would they would need to know the operations of how that would be working?
Mm-hmm.
Who would be who would be available for that? Who wants that? How many people? There would have to be a lot more detail
Mm.
on the execution.
Mm-hmm.
Who would we be including? Who makes the decision?
Mm-hmm.
And then are we covering, well, what if someone or some people don't agree with this? And how do we come to some mutual agreement so
Mm-hmm.
everybody's on the same page working together?
Right.
And if this is going to be implemented, in this case outside of the United States, then how do we implement flex time in perhaps cultures that may not want flex time?
Right.
They may not want it. They're very culturally used to, and I use that, I'm saying culture a lot, but I just drive this because it's so important.
Mm-hmm.
Um, One, they may not want flex time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Two, that may not work in their daily operations.
Right.
Three, so forth and so on. So there's so many factors, different factors that have to be for a Chinese person to understand, to be able to say, okay, I'm on board with this. Again, that more detail.
Ah.
So, and then in other cultures, um, how do we have flex time around holidays? And there may be a lot of religious holidays, or there could be more festivals, like in
In
India.
India.
In India, and so how do we incorporate that into the time?
Mm.
Age will have flex time. Maybe age is an issue because that can be a flex time. Maybe if you're younger, you're supposed to work harder in
Right.
some cultures, and then as you get older. So again, how many different factors that are being looked at
Mm-hmm.
into making that decision on a cross cultural team or in a cross cultural team?
Right. Whereas in the U.S., I'd be like, okay, yeah, I'd like to actually work Monday through Friday, normal hours, or I'd like to work, Monday through Thursday, 10 hour, 10 fours, done.
That's right.
And I'd like walk out the meeting.
And adios, we've made the decision,
Right.
and there we go.
Right.
Instead of, that may be fine for me,
Right.
And that's very individualistic, which America is a very individualistic country.
Mm-hmm.
Where if you're working with collective societies, it is more the we, and I'm not saying that America's not we, but looking at the collective and
Uh,
including everybody.
and what would a culture like that be?
Again, very collective societies would be like Japanese, would be the Asian countries, it would be India, it would be many of the African countries are collective,
Mm,
South American,
mm-hmm.
there's many countries that are collective.
Right. So
Um,
the collective means, and it's just so foreign. Having been a good portion of my corporate career was at GE, Microsoft, and it's very individualistic at both of those places. There's less of a we involved. So can you explain the concept of we and collective?
we in collective versus
Yes,
individualistic.
I understand the individualist part. This is what I want. I'm going for it, right?
Right. And we are taught in utero as Americans, I.
Mm-hmm.
We are taught the I. We
Mm-hmm.
are taught to ask questions.
Mm-hmm.
We are, again, these are very general statements, but we're also taught to question.
Mm-hmm.
We are taught to question, and we don't take everything at face value, and we can be outspoken.
Mm-hmm.
Where more in collective societies, it could be more hierarchical. And when we look at families or we look at, again, companies and corporations.
Mm-hmm.
So the CEO of a company will be the one that is dictating, and I don't say that in negative time, but is, dictating out how things will be done. And then that will be dealt with in a very collective hierarchical sense.
Okay, what would
So
that look like? So the
from
so
the,
the
from the top down.
okay, the senpai will say like, "This is how I want things done." Go
Right.
tell that person would he or she would tell their managers, and then their managers would go tell other people, and it would like trickle down like that.
That's right. And
Oh,
so it would trickle down from the top up instead of, is this more of a linear or a horizontal type of decision making corporation, or is it, my hands are going up? See,
right.
that's very New York, um, very cultural. Um, and my hands have been slapped in Asia for don't use your hands so much. Um, but, is this a horizontal, linear type of organization where decisions are made like
Everyone
together?
has to, yeah, we all have to agree.
Or, or is it going to be more of the hierarchical where it is a top down?
Okay, got it.
And that happens often in collective societies, in collective ways. So the dictate comes down, but we work together
Oh,
in
okay.
in implementing whatever the decisions, the rules, the policies, and so forth.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, got it. So there's certain collective. And then I want to go back to certain body gestures because you're talking about you're in New York and I'm from New Jersey. So I'm going to do the same. So if you're in a cross-cultural meeting, are there what are the physical things like body language? Or I have a friend who's Canadian. She talks really close to me. Like when I talk to her, I feel like I'm constantly stepping away.
Right.
And I think it's
Yeah.
maybe Canadian. Yeah, I think because she's Canadian, she's like wants. And I have a friend who's also Latina, and when we talk, she's when we walk around the lake, she always like pushes her arm next to me because she wants to snuggle. And I'm always like walking away
Getting
from
away,
her.
away, away.
Too close. What are you trying to
Yeah.
snuggle with me? I don't understand what's happening. So what are what are the body language things that we should be aware of when we're in a cross cultural meeting?
All right. Well, that's a perfect one. I mean, first of all, how close do I space?
Yeah.
About space. And depending, like if you're in a place like Hong Kong, space is of it's a priority,
Right.
because it's so crowded. So people are like this; they're always moving along like this in very crowded conditions.
Yes.
If you grow up in a place, I'll say Seattle, it's much more expansive.
Right.
We have space, so we don't zoom.
Yeah.
People aren't living in close high rises that are
Yeah. Oh, I totally get it. When I was in where was I in China? We were in Shanghai, and we got into the bullet train or whatever it was, the subway. I don't remember what it was called, but anyways, we went into the equivalent of a subway, and people were just jammed. Like I would be standing there, and someone would be touching my butt, like not touching, but like they would be standing that close to me. I could feel their breath.
Yeah,
next to me. I was like, can you give me a little room? And everyone was just jammed in there. And the more people kept on coming in, I was like, oh my God, we're literally jammed in here like sardines. So
right.
that's literally, it's a comfort with being that close. Whereas in Seattle, you would never, when we got into,
Space.
yeah, it'd be like, so, and then people do their body gestures to create space. Like, they sit like this or,
That's right.
whatever to create space.
That's right. So
Okay.
depending on how one is living and brought up, space and how one moves around. Okay, and if it's like tight, they're going to be right on top of one another. We grow up with, whoa, we need
Right.
18 inches to be able to talk. Another is eye contact.
Mm-hmm.
Again, in many Western cultures, eye contact means that you're listening to me.
Mm-hmm.
That's not always the case because I could be looking at you and not listening at all
Right.
because I've got a million things on my mind.
Right.
But we have this, and that is supposed to create trust.
Mm.
Where in many cultures, eye contact is rude. It's
Mm.
like you're staring at me. You're
Oh.
this instead of eyes down. I can have a little bit of eye contact, but I don't need to be looking at you all the time. So I
Mm.
think that you need to understand what that means and how do you feel about it. In the
Mm.
sense of, if we're brought up to believe that eye contact is very important when we're talking to someone and it's rude to look away.
Right, which is very American. Is that also Western in other European
In some
cultures?
others, yeah, in some other cultures in Europe and so forth, yes.
Okay.
But then in other cultures to be looking,
You mean Asia? Is it mostly Asian cultures and
oh,
probably?
and it could be in some Hispanic, some it could be
Oh.
in American, it could be in Africa for sure. It
Oh.
just depends that this and even within our own country with the Native Americans, eye contact is not always that important.
Okay.
I mean it's actually rude. There's
Right. To
this
look.
toning down. So there's that. Hand movements. In many cultures, you don't use hands. You would sit more with your hands either folded or something.
Yeah. So
There's
just
not
like
a
this kind of thing.
because it's disruptive.
Oh.
It's like if you're moving around, people can't, just sit calmly. Where then you get the Italians and the French, and everybody's screaming and yelling and carrying on. So there's that. So and so and how do we sit even?
Oh.
Some cultures, again, this is body behavior. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
some cultures want you to sit very, as they say, properly. You're sitting very
Right.
erect,
Mm-hmm.
and you're very, more conservative in that. In
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
other people just are, their arms are back, they're like this. So you're being perceived, and 90% of communication is nonverbal.
Right.
I
Right.
mean, we think this is all blah, 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 is
Right.
everything. It is not. It is not. How are your eyes? Are you looking? Are you really listening? What's your body saying? Are you slumped over shoulders? What's that person thinking? Or if somebody comes in and they start like this,
Right.
they're mad.
Right.
So body language is very, very important and in cultural too. And the way someone dresses.
Mm.
You have to be aware that culturally, certain dress is not acceptable, and in other, of course, anything goes.
Okay, what cultures so if anything goes, it doesn't matter, I guess it assumes. But for those cultures that are very conscious of dress, what would be the cultures that would be conscious and how are you supposed to dress?
Well, um, in the Middle East and so forth, for a woman, of course, to have their
Everything's
arms
covered.
covered, arms covered, a longer dress if you're long, don't
Right.
wear a short. Um,
Like
so
over your knees, right? Like I can't remember. It has to be pretty long.
right, right,
No ankles even, right? You're not supposed to
right.
even show ankles.
That's right. So it would be important for anybody who is working again in that cross-cultural context to be very aware and try to do some, pre-work in the sense of what is acceptable. And also with touch.
Hmm.
And again, we'll talk about Americans can be very touchy or the pat on the shoulder.
Yeah, like high five,
Yeah, or high
fist
five.
bumps, right?
Exactly.
Right.
And we kind of be, touchy and so forth. And many cultures are not. And then you have to look at gender with touch, which may be unacceptable.
Oh, okay. So there's certain cultures where you would not touch a woman at all
That's right. And vice versa. A woman would not touch a man.
Because what does it mean? Like it's considered that's sexual?
Yeah, it would be either sexual or religiously unacceptable, or
Oh,
there's many factors to look at that. But so when you are, if you're in unknown territory, just bow your head or wait for the other person to extend their hand because
hmm.
we're used to extending our hand, handshake or whatever,
Yeah.
and just kind of wait and see. Step
So it's
back.
better to just like bow in acknowledgement. Like the whole Japanese is just like it's like this kind of
That's right.
bow, right?
That's
No one like grabs your hand. It probably feels like an affront if your hand just comes. You're like, why is that person trying to hit me? Why is their hand coming towards me?
like, look out. If there's anything that, and this is one of the most valuable tools you can have in cross cultural, are your business cards.
Hmm.
You
Oh,
present your business card, number
and you
one.
have to present it like this, right, with your hands.
That's right, with your two thumbs. You see? Whoop, whoop. Two thumbs in the middle.
Okay.
And it will be accepted. And then again, that's a way of an introduction, which is
Right.
wonderful without going through all the handshakes or the touch or,
Right.
whatever.
Like I can't figure out what's going on. I'll just do my business card.
That's right. And then if you take, you must take a few minutes or a second or a minute to look at the information that's coming on the card because there's a lot of information on a business card. One
Mm,
is, of course, the name of the company that you work
mm-hmm.
for,
Mm-hmm.
and that says something to people right away.
Mm-hmm.
Number two, your title,
Mm-hmm.
which is underneath the name. And in some cultures, it depends where your office building is located. How prestigious are you? Where do you stand?
Oh,
Whoops.
wow. So they're really interpreting all aspects of that
And
card.
on that card, on that one piece of little paper,
Right.
is giving you so much information without
Mm,
one word being said.
mm, mm.
So that's another nonverbal way of an
And I know
introduction.
that this is an Asian, I know this is a Asian thing. Is that true across all Asian cultures?
Yeah,
Okay.
usually.
Okay.
And
Okay.
so like this.
Yeah. Interesting.
So, and that is true in other cultures. We may just do the one hand,
Right.
um, and so forth, and then just hand it on.
Right.
Now, when you get all these business cards, I mean, you could go to some function where you get 35 business cards, and you go, I can't remember who is this person, So always make a little mark. Like I always say to clients, like, oh, it was the guy with the red tie with polka dots,
Right.
something that,
Right. Something
that's
to visually connect it.
yeah, because then of course the cross cultural protocol would be is to send an email, a note, and say it was really lovely meeting you, and do we want to get together and so forth and so on.
Oh, okay. So there's
Do
a
a follow
expected
up,
follow up once you get a
a
card.
follow up exactly.
So
So there's all
funny.
that goes on. So back to our man here in Seattle with
Yes.
Microsoft.
Yes.
Um, I would suggest strongly that he try to bring his, those four or five cultures together.
Mm-hmm.
Number one, that each person have that moment to understand what is culture.
Mm-hmm.
And culture is incorporates everything about a society, what they've been doing for generations, whether that's morals, values, rituals, music, food, dress, how we conduct business. And have that understanding of culture and then be able to lead into, well, how would you do this in India?
Mm-hmm.
How would you do this in China, Russia, US? So again,
Mm.
bringing their cultures to the table.
Ah, that's interesting. So instead of like right now, I think that the presumption is like you're here in the US, you're working at Microsoft, you figure out my culture
That's
because that's the whole idea. Like, why did you come here if you're not expecting to learn my culture? So an alternative would be, all right, how are meetings conducted in China? How are meetings conducted? Like, how do you, is it okay to, and there's like, and it sounds like there are all sorts of details, right? How much information do you need to provide beforehand to provide context? How
mhm.
is it okay to interrupt? Is it okay to ask questions? And so let's say in you already you've told me that the Chinese meeting would be conducted very differently
Mhm.
than let's say the American meeting at Microsoft, right? It's okay to interrupt. It's not okay to interrupt.
We could
It's
let's
okay.
scream and fight, and an hour later, everybody's going out to get a drink.
Right.
Whatever.
Right.
With their conflict is just you try to do everything to steer away from any conflict.
Right.
You will swim, as I say. The communication is a figure eight. There's no beginning, no end.
Right.
Because don't ask for a yes or a no from your team or individuals unless you're emphatically finished with the discussion, because you've backed people in the corner.
Oh.
That's closed. So you learn to swim with all kinds of dialogues, but really with conflict and conflict resolution and how that's dealt with in different cultures is a piece of art. It's an art. And to learn how to do it most effectively, so you can move on with your business
Right.
and conduct it.
Right.
Where here, if we have arguments, we're fine. If we don't,
Right.
fine, whatever.
Yeah.
But it's taking this team and understanding how, back to Microsoft, how do we bring all these cultures in together? How do we want to work together as a team? Defining that.
Right.
That we have all these cultures, and how do we want to proceed?
Right. So let's say that I had a team of Chinese people who have a specific meeting protocol, and I don't know what would be the Russian protocol. Do you know, or the Indian? Would it be any different? I assume it would be. In meetings.
It would have their own. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how would you negotiate those things then? Because then, let's say that there's like a 10-person team and 8 of them are Chinese. You're a manager who's not Chinese. So would you just say, well, I guess I'm going to have to be the one who adapts and follows the Chinese protocol and the Chinese, because they're the majority? Or how have you seen companies negotiate those differences?
Okay. And that's where again, a team like that really has to come together, define their cultures, explain their cultures and how we would operate.
Right.
But then how do we define our own team?
Yeah.
Ultimately, and again, decision making in certain cultures, in many cultures, decision making would be deferred to the person of the highest title.
Mm-hmm.
Because you're ultimately the one that's responsible.
Mm-hmm.
So again, is that how we want to operate, that we defer?
Right.
Or how we make it comfortable for cultures to be able to express how they feel?
Right.
And that it's okay, and that we are defining ourselves as a team.
Right.
Or do we want to defer? And the senior person needs to know within that setting that he or she will take the responsibility, because this is my team makeup.
Right.
This is
Right.
culture they would do.
Yeah. So even like how are decisions made? Um, who makes the decision? Is it all of us? How much input is received? Like, it seems like it would take almost a meeting to figure out what things happen, because there's so many decisions that happen within an office, right? Sometimes it's like flex time that are kind of like those kind of things. And there's kind of actual business decisions that have to be made about, shipping a product or marketing a product or strategy.
Right.
So it seems like I guess you'd have to come up with a lot of heuristics on how things work, the norms of how things work, because otherwise it probably feels unsafe for someone who doesn't really know the culture and what's happening or what to expect, because they don't
Right.
really know.
And then, people will say, oh, we don't have time for this. We've just got to get on. The bottom line is we have to meet, the quarterly
Right. Yeah, by the
report.
time we talk about like who does what and what decisions making, we've like lost like 2 meetings, 2 hours, and we haven't decided
Right.
anything.
And that's where time is another, very interesting cultural characteristic, because time for one culture, okay, time means money. Time, got to turn it over, turn it over. Or do we take time and we've got to get to look at this detail, and we need to address this, and we need to include this person in the next meeting, and so forth and so on. And what I will say to seniors and CEOs is take the time in the beginning to establish and define teams and cultures and cross-cultural teams and leadership.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then you will be able to move much more smoothly.
Right. Right.
If you think, okay, this is it, 1 hour is worth it, no more. No. You'll probably, you'll run into a lot of conflict with that. Conflict number one, you'll waste time. you'll have to come back and say, well, gee, I told them, this is what I wanted. No one objected. No one said anything. No one asked any questions. And then, by Friday, guess what?
Right.
Work wasn't done, or it wasn't done the way it was supposed to be done. And again, in some cultures, why didn't they just come and ask me if they didn't understand?
Mm.
No.
Okay, so what that's a I'm imagining as a manager, I have a group of people who are afraid to ask questions, are silent in the meeting, and I feel like I have their consent with whatever I'm saying because I'm telling them and they're not saying anything back. So what would I do in those situations where I would like to make sure I get their consent? Do I have to have the meeting and then go back and have another meeting with them? I mean, how does one work in those situations?
Well, consent, or I'd step back even further, is to make sure that everybody understands
Hmm.
what is being said again. And again, are we just using verbal? And the first question is, everybody on your team, is English their first language?
Hmm. Right. So let's say that it's not their first language. So I'm going in and saying, "Hey, I'm going to implement this new flex time. Does anyone have any objections?" And let's say that, someone's like, "I do," but I'm not going to say anything because I don't want to like say anything to make you look bad because you're my boss. So then what do you do? Because you assume that because as a manager and not saying anything, you seem like I assume they're okay.
Yeah.
So
So I have to learn as a leader that everyone has understood what I want. And so, if I'm dealing with people on my team that English is not their first language, silence could mean is that they're processing.
like, what did that person even just say? What's flex time? What's that acronym mean? Like, what's happening?
And they may be rolling it back into their first language to then be able to play it back out into English too.
Mm-hmm.
Silence there.
Mm-hmm.
Two, this is where either PowerPoint or something that's more written out and visible in front of people, they can read it. And then they can digest that too, not just, again, by the verbal interaction.
Ah, right. So if I'm actually just, hey, let's talk about this, and I'm just have like a little bullet that says flex time, and I don't have a PowerPoint that someone can actually read as well, it's probably very complicated for them to like track the whole conversation even.
Exactly. And then
Right.
you follow up. There's a follow up, and you think, oh, no, please, Leslie, I don't have time for this. Oh, yeah. Like the next day, send out something on email. Make sure that maybe you include some of the notes or what was handed out the day before.
Mm-hmm.
Or even more now with the management style, getting out there on the floor and talking with your people. Say, how you doing? With what we talked about. Just, but in a very non-condescending way.
Mm-hmm.
That there is just, oh, let's see how you're doing. Oh, great. Just to make sure, one, that they do understand,
Mm-hmm.
and that they are following through on what had been decided the day before.
Okay, so if you actually meet with them one on one, those employees that have that culture that you're not supposed to like say anything, is it because they're not supposed to say something in a group meeting, but if you go to them afterwards in a one on one context, so like, well, here are the issues that I have. Is
Mm.
that what happens?
Well, sometimes, like for people to speak out, that's difficult in any culture.
Mm-hmm.
Some people just do not feel that they can speak out.
Mm.
Secondly, though, in some cultures, depending again, if you're the senior person, they don't speak out. They listen, they take it in, and we get on with but we won't ask questions because we don't want them to know that maybe we don't understand, and so forth and so on.
But
Um,
then how do I work with someone like that? Or it's like they're in a
that's
hierarchical situation, they'll just do it and don't worry about it.
right.
Okay.
Yeah. Or they may leave the meeting and then go to one of their people, the colleagues, and ask them to help them. But that's where you get into trouble too, because you have to make sure that everybody understood it, or are they getting misinformation from the colleague?
Right.
So how do you keep following through to make sure? One is, I think it's very important for leaders to express their style. What is their leadership style to their team?
Mm-hmm.
And that is reinforced in different ways. Like if you say you have an open door policy, huh? Like what does open door policy mean? So you almost have to, for some people, they get it. They
Right.
know exactly what that means. Other people may not know. That means, please come in and talk to me about anything. Well, again, that could be hard for different cultures, but bit by bit, if you, and I don't want to say call people in, but just have them come in and be comfortable in the office.
Mm-hmm.
Get them used to this concept, because
Mm-hmm.
many of them are not used to an open door policy. And
Mm.
that's one example.
Right.
What
Right.
brings the team together too often is food.
Right.
If you want to be able to get to know them better and have a better understanding, and they have an understanding of you, once a month, whatever, go out for lunch.
Mm-hmm.
Have something that you share together, whether it's something after work,
Mm-hmm.
because everybody gets to see one another in a different light, but it gives you some understanding of how to relax, and you can work with people in that context too. And
Mm-hmm.
in many cultures, work and their professional and personal life is very much blended.
Mm-hmm.
Where in the States, we tend to divide. I
Mm-hmm.
go to work, I leave whenever I leave, and then I have my personal life, and in many cases that doesn't overlap.
Mm-hmm.
Where in other cultures it does, so they're very used to maybe going out for dinners or lunches or whatever. It's very much a part of the cultures. So
Right.
that help for the leader to start saying these are different ways of seeing if your people are understanding and they're getting to know you as much as you're getting to know them.
Right. Right. Wow. What are the cultures that are food oriented? Is that because our Chinese cultures? Because Chinese cultures seem to me,
Oh,
uh,
every yes, yes.
really?
Oh, yeah. I
Oh,
mean, I think every culture, if
right.
you look at it, I
Right.
don't care if Canadian, I don't care if it's US, if you look at Latin America, every continent, every food and music and sport bring people together.
Right. Right. So kind of put those kind of those situations in so that people feel more relaxed and comfortable because they may not be like because even in the even when I was in Japan, my grandfather was this very high level executive, and he would never eat like there was this whole hierarchical thing where people would like open the doors and like who stepped in front of whom and who ate with like it just seemed like that wasn't it wasn't this collegial collective kind of thing. It was this whole hierarchical thing. Is that
Right.
still happening in a lot of cultures, or is that because in the U.S. it's now even that's kind of shifting around
Right.
where it's more like it's power among versus power over. Is the power above and below is that kind of more dominant in still most of the other cultures, or is it changing?
It's changing. I think you need to, when you're having meetings in certain cultures that have had more of the hierarchy, it's the look at the age group. Number one,
Mm-hmm.
if you're dealing with a person in their mid 50s, 60s, 70s, they're going to more than likely be more traditional in that sense.
Mm-hmm.
But now you've got a whole group of people, the 20s and 30s,
Mm-hmm.
some of the 40s, um, that have been either Western educated or Eastern educated and have an understanding of what the management styles are in both East, West, North, South.
Oh.
They are bringing that back to their home countries, their passport countries or their home countries, and when they're working, or they're able to take that with their work in if they're expatriates or whatever, we're
Right.
calling them, and they can bring that style in and people will have a better understanding. So they have a duality about them, or if not more.
Mm.
So
Right.
they are to me like the they're the next group because
Right.
they get it.
Yeah, it's the millennials and the Gen Xers because they've actually been exposed to all the different cultures. And so that must be interesting because I have interviewed quite a few people on millennials, and they say that the millennial trend is global, that
Yeah,
all millennials everywhere act this millennial
they
kind
do.
of way. And I think it
They're
is because of
phenomenal.
the internet, right? They look at a YouTube in Seattle or a YouTube in France or a YouTube in China, and it's like, oh, okay, this is how we are supposed to act with globally, right?
Yeah, and they know it. They are just on they're on the ticket right there. I
Right.
just look at them, and when they I just think they're amazing. The millennials and, into their 30s and so forth. I mean, they just have this understanding.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I know I'm being very general, but I really mean it. They have such an understanding.
Right.
And I have two kids. One's 30 and one's 26, and they are just on it.
Yeah.
And I see their friends. I see work with, the millennials and the 30-year-olds and so forth. They're just very well connected globally.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
absolutely.
generally they have this format about them that they know cross-cultural. And since this is our topic,
Yeah.
cross-culturally. The other one thing I want to say about communication too, try not to use slang.
Mm-hmm.
Slang does not work. So it's slang, be a little bit more formal. I'm not saying formal, but to be a little bit more formal and try to, if you're from a culture that uses slang in
Yeah.
their verbal everyday action, it's not going to work.
Yeah, like if I go, oh, snap,
Right.
they're like, what does snap mean? Like, what is that?
Oh, we're coming into home base. Well, what does that mean?
Right.
Anybody? I mean, hello. But so try to be a little bit more formal.
Yes.
Um, Again, age is very important in some cultures, and the respect
Right.
that you would have for an older person is a given.
Right.
And so to understand that for some cultures like here, 20, 30, 50, 60, 80,
Doesn't
everybody's,
matter. You're the same, right? Whereas in Asian cultures, if you're probably 50, 60, 80, you're like wise to be revered.
I would say in most cultures, yeah.
Yeah.
I would say in most cultures, yeah, outside of North America, that age is revered.
Yeah. Too
Mm.
bad. Too bad. Age should be revered here because I'm
It
getting
will
old.
be because we're in numbers. We're coming up in numbers.
All
So
right,
we
so
cheer
I want
up
to go. I want to
everybody.
go back to like since we have a little bit more time. We have about 5 more minutes. I want to talk about conflict resolution. Is that possible in a short period of time?
We can touch upon it. Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean,
Okay. So how is conflict resolution handled differently? Because you're saying like in the Eastern cultures, it's kind of a navigating back and forth. You're saying it's earlier when we were speaking that you're saying it's more direct versus indirect. Like Chinese culture, my own experience with my family, it's very indirect.
very
Um,
indirect.
so how is conflict handled differently with different cultures?
Well, again, if you look, I always say the French and the Italians, they can scream and yell, and it's this and that, and the hands are raising
Right.
and whatever, and they get
And
it
then
out.
yeah, yeah, and then I love you afterwards. No big deal.
Exactly. And
Right.
they're hugging and kissing, and whatever an hour later. And okay, here in America, I think we say it, we yell it
Right.
pretty
It's
much,
yeah, and it's done.
and it's done and again finished, right?
Hmm.
And does anybody feel bad? Have we covered everything that everybody was upset about? Da
Right.
da 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 da. Okay, and we're hoping that everyone is being honest, right? That yeah, we're finished. We know that sometimes that's not the truth that people hold.
Hmm.
And then some people can be very passive aggressive or it has to be revisited.
Hmm.
Okay. And then in other cultures, and again, the Asian and so forth cultures, um, it's more like the first thing is you do, you never argue
Hmm.
in the sense of screaming, yelling, I disagree with you.
Right.
Again, I preface though, depending on who the members are, if they've been west, east, north, south.
Right.
Okay, so that's different because they get it.
Right.
But if you are really dealing in a more very much monocultural area or that particular country, so you would stay away from conflict, and that's where, as a leader and a senior person, you have to be very aware that we're getting into a territory and we back off. Number one,
Mm.
we're going to take the meeting back to where it was safe and people were more comfortable, and that you have to read because
Mm.
people haven't said very much, not speaking out or speaking up,
Hmm.
saying yes, but not yes means yes, yes means maybe, yes means no.
Right.
But so stepping back to where it was a smooth time, and
Mm.
those are little things like take a break,
Hmm.
go for coffee, everybody. in other words, and then come back. And as the leader or senior, you would start back where everybody was on board.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so there's number one, that.
Mm-hmm.
Number two is that I would, if I was leading a meeting, I would have no problem to say, oh, wait a minute, oh, wait. And then say, oh, I don't understand. Could someone explain what we've been basically talking about,
Right.
in the last 25, 30 minutes? I just don't get it.
Right.
And that gives everybody that what I'm doing is I'm buying time there. I'm making it again. I'm taking it out of, ooh, I see what's going on here. And one culture may be fighting with another culture, or I can see there's going to be a disagreement, or there's going to be some misunderstandings. So I take it back to buy time. So I get people to, and hopefully talk.
Yeah, I don't get it either. Yeah, or whatever.
Yeah.
Or I still don't understand, or I kind of disagree.
Yeah.
I see.
You
Got
want
it.
to make it safe.
Right.
You want to make it safe, CJ, because it's got to be safe. Because most people in some cultures do not verbalize that they're feeling angry or upset.
Right. Yes.
So that you're not going to see it, you will feel it.
Right.
If you are a person that can read it
Right.
and read body. And sometimes you won't even know it. I've worked with a person, he said he had his PA had been with him for 18 years or something.
Mm-hmm.
This was from Hong Kong. And he was the CEO, 18 or 20 years. They had moved buildings, and he said, all of a sudden our relationship, we had the best relationship. And this went on for 2 years.
Wow.
That there was a distance. There was the wall. And he did something like didn't get her own key for the washroom where she had her own key. And that may sound very like, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's real. And that's where you need to know.
Wow. We have little subtle things. I have that happen. And it's interesting. I mean, humans are humans. There's even within the Seattle culture, there's a Seattle person and a New York person, completely different.
Night and day.
Yeah. And so, or even I've been doing these meetings within the U.S. with mostly Americans, and all the same things happen, right? I had someone who was seething the whole time, and she said, I was just so mad when this person said that. And if you looked at her face, she looked like there was no
deadpan.
She looked like peaceful, almost like, almost like religious peaceful. I had no idea she was seething the whole time. So these things happen even within one culture because people are different. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
New Yorkers are going to get it out.
Right.
Where the Southerners may not, or the West Coast will do it through jogging.
Right.
Whatever. Or climb mountains, whatever we do. But it's understanding how to resolve conflict that will be effective.
Right. Yeah.
And also, again, when you're saying that, this unconscious bias, which I'm very, very, it needs to be incorporated into cross-cultural, because that's our biases that we get when we are young.
Right.
And for people in conflict, since we're talking about conflict could be absolutely devastating for them.
Right. Right. Depending on the family. Right. Absolutely.
Or they grew up in an atmosphere where there was a lot of yelling and screaming, or there was just no conflict.
Right.
So they don't know what to do with it.
Yeah, and that's where, and I want to talk on another show about that with you, because I think that could be almost a whole entire show, like how someone is raised, their family, like it comes into work in so many different ways I've seen through coaching. We've been talking to Leslie Lewis, the founder of Culture 3 Council. Thank you so much.
It means so much to me that you're listening to the show. I would love your support in any way by giving me comments below, or to subscribe to the show, or share the show with friends. Thank you again for your support. Love and blessings.